June 1944. A damp mist clings to the hedgerows of Normandy, where a squad of Canadian infantrymen huddles in a shallow ditch. Ahead of them, through the haze, the low rumble of tracks echoes off stone walls, a German Panzer IV grinding forward, its turret sweeping for threats. Two soldiers maneuver a stubby tube into position, resting it on the earth bank. It's short and ungainly, with a padded shoulder rest and a massive spring inside. The PIAT, the weapon they call the plumber's nightmare. The weapon that veterans from Italy have already deemed a back-breaking curse. The gunner drops to his knee, hauling back on the cocking lever with a grunt. His loader slides a finned bomb into the tray, the high-explosive warhead gleaming dully. The sergeant whispers a range estimate. A tense pause, then the hedgerow erupts. The trigger releases. The spigot hurls the bomb forward in a whoosh, no flame or smoke to betray them. Downrange, the projectile arcs low and slams into the Panzer's side with a thunderous crack. The shaped charge detonates, melting through armor in a white-hot jet. The tank shudders, smoke pouring from a ragged hole, its engine seizing in agony. The men stare, breathless from the recoil's jolt, and from the fresh kill scar on the beast they were told couldn't be slain. To understand how this supposedly cursed launcher reached this moment, and how Canadian hands turned it into a tiger slayer, we have to go back to where it began. In the early 1940s, long before Canadian gunners were holding German panzers in French fields, the terror of tanks was already driving urgent innovation in British workshops and drawing boards. The Blitzkrieg had rolled through France in 1940, exposing the weaknesses of old anti-tank rifles like the Boys. By 1941-1942, British intelligence warned of even deadlier German armor, thicker plates, heavier guns, swarming in combined arms assaults. Infantry commanders knew that without a portable stopper, their men would be overrun like wheat before a scythe. The solution, in theory, was radical, not a rifle punching with brute force, but a launcher using explosive science. A shaped charge bomb to burn through steel, fired from a simple tube. No recoil from gunpowder, just a massive spring to absorb the kick. The project that became the PIAT, Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, emerged in this desperation. At Imperial Chemical Industries and military labs, engineers built a spigot mortar, a rod that struck the bomb's tail, propelling it forward while the tube recoiled backward on its spring. It fired a 3-pound bomb capable of piercing over 100 m of armor, with a crude sight and no backblast. It weighed as much as 2 rifles, and cocking it demanded the strength of a wrestler. When adopted in 1943, it bore the stamp of Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker, whose earlier designs inspired it. It was never pretty, but on proving grounds against mock-ups of Panzer IIIs and captured hulls, the stubby launcher did what rifles couldn't: melt holes in heavy plate at close range. As the Allies prepared for invasion, the PIAT flowed to Commonwealth forces. Shipments crossed to Canada, where growing divisions needed a real tank killer for their platoons. Canadian troops drilling in England and at home received the awkward tubes, trained in bomb loading, range guessing, and aim for the hull. On blueprints, the math was stark. Disciplined infantry, armed with the PIAT, could now turn the tide against armored breakthroughs. But the war that hit North Africa in 1943 cared little for blueprints, and in the dust and chaos of Tunisia, the launcher's true trials would unfold with punishing clarity. The Tunisian campaign in 1943 marked the PIAT's brutal baptism in combat. In Canadian and British training films, diagrams showed clean kills, bomb trajectories, penetration depths, arrows pointing to vital spots. The pitch was straightforward. If infantry held firm and fired true, the PIAT would gut enemy tanks from the inside. In the scrubby hills and wadis of North Africa, reality was messier. German armored thrusts struck with speed, dust clouds masking their approach. Their tanks had evolved, up-armored Panzer IVs with sloped fronts supported by nimble reconnaissance. PIAT teams often engaged at extreme edges of range, under suppressive fire from awkward positions. Accounts trickled back from squads that had braced the launcher, endured the bone-jarring cocking, and watched bombs arc short or detonate harmlessly on angled plates. Gunners strained against the spring, fired into the haze, and saw tanks rumble on unscathed. The weapon's quirks, its short reach, the need to expose oneself to cock it amplified the letdown. The blast of launch was silent, but the physical toll was loud. Bruised shoulders, strained backs, failed fuses. Swiftly, a nickname spread: In dugouts, convoys, and rear areas, the PIAT was mocked as a spring-loaded headache, a gadget that promised much but delivered pain. For many Commonwealth soldiers who endured Tunisia's retreats and stalls, the launcher evoked frustration, near misses, and shattered confidence. Yet the tale didn't end in dismissal. Axis forces seized dozens of abandoned PIATs from captured positions. They rechambered some for testing, firing them at Allied vehicles and bunkers. In evaluation reports, German experts noted its potential. Within tight ranges, the shaped charge posed a real danger to side armor and lighter tanks. Back in Canada and Britain, ordnance boards absorbed both failures and glimpses of success. The PIAT couldn't snipe tanks from afar like artillery, but it could cripple armored advances if tactics evolved. The issue wasn't just the tube, it was deployment and expectations. This insight sparked a subtle evolution. Canadian technicians tweaked designs, trainers overhauled manuals. Filmmakers captured live-fire demos to teach when and how the nightmare could still nightmare the panzers. They were poised to transform a flawed launcher into a precision ambush tool, and in the process, deliver the jolt German commanders would feel when the useless PIAT began shredding their formations. When Canadian engineers and armorers examined the PIAT post-Tunisia, they saw not a failure, but a puzzle of fixes waiting to be solved. In factories from Toronto to Birmingham, production ramped up from Blacker's blueprints. The core couldn't shift. A spigot-fired bomb with explosive penetration recoiled by a giant spring, but peripherals could sharpen. The crude iron sights were upgraded to luminous models for low light, etched with better range marks. The cocking mechanism, infamous for demanding a full-body heave, was refined with smoother levers and training aids to ease the strain. Meanwhile, munitions experts tackled the ammo. Early bombs with dud fuses gave way to reliable variants, their shaped charges honed for deeper burns through sloped steel. The launcher wouldn't fell a tiger from 300 yards, but at infantry's gritty distances, under 100 yards, it could now vaporize engine blocks, turret rings, and hull sides with a well-aimed hit. Gradually, the device that felt like a hasty contraption matured into a targeted killer. The Canadian MKIA variant, with its adjusted fittings and pragmatic manuals, mirrored battlefield truths over hype. To instructors, this alignment trumped specs, a weapon trusted in doctrine-bred accurate shots and bold use. Tactics evolved in tandem. The PIAT ceased being a universal tank slayer. It became a platoon asset for close-quarters disruption. Manuals stressed side shots over fronts, vulnerabilities in tracks, optics, and ammo racks. On mock battlefields, Canadian sergeants demonstrated via models. Flank positions in cover let heavies pass, then hammer scouts, half-tracks, and support that fed the armored beast its speed. Cripple those, and even a Panther column could grind to a halt, exposed and fumbling. Step by step, via metal tweaks, bomb upgrades, and mindset shifts, Canada forged a disappointing gadget into a calculated system. The PIAT hadn't outgrown German steel, but Canadian crews were mastering its edges to tip the scales, and that demanded peering past hardware, to the troops wrestling the spring and the officers witnessing German reactions when their flawed foe suddenly became lethally precise. For the Canadians who wielded it, the PIAT was never mere inventory. It was sweat-soaked burden, rib-cracking recoil, and a life-or-death gamble on whether it would ignite when tanks loomed. In rifle platoons, it belonged to a dedicated pair, one lugging the tube, another toting bombs in canvas slings. Others pitched in for shifts or digs. On slogging advances through Sicilian dust or Norman mud, the launcher snagged on gear, weighed like an anchor, its bulk a constant gripe amid helmet knocks and blistering feet. But on ranges and in forward foxholes, those men glimpsed its bite when stars aligned. In scripted drills, they targeted derelict vehicles and steel plates at oblique angles. At point-blank, bombs bored through, igniting mock fires, splintering wheels. Operators learned to brace the kick, sink breaths, and reload swiftly under duress, bombs dropping into trays with metallic thunks. Vehicle mounted on Bren carriers or jeeps, the PIAT morphed into a roving viper for hit-and-run strikes. Canadian patrols exploited woods, ruins, and ridges to stalk, then unleash on German flanks. Against armored cars, transports, and pillboxes, a precise bomb could torch fuel, shred crews, or force dismounts into kill zones. Mindset mattered as much as mechanics. Lingering tailies from Africa bred doubt. To combat it, Canadian officers went beyond words. They screened films, staged live kills, dissected wrecks. One key reel for Commonwealth troops framed tank hunting as ritual. Spot, range, launch, assess, repeat. It recast panzers as flawed contraptions, ripe for exploitation by steady hands. Across lines, German tankers didn't scoff outright. Frontline logs cited holed half-tracks, spalled interiors wounding crews from large anti-tank hits. Seized PIATs were dissected, fired in trials, sometimes repurposed for rear guards. For Wehrmacht scouts in lighter rigs, the specter of a silent, close-range burner loomed as a grim equalizer. By mid-war, a subtle standoff brewed. Many allies still cursed the PIAT's quirks, yet Canadian gunners and techs had honed its niche. German leaders couldn't ignore it as scrap. In adept grasp, it regained menace. These strands, design, drills, spirit, foe wariness, would fuse when a Canadian PIAT team, cited per doctrine, confronted a live German push head-on. It unfolded not in epic clashes, but in the sharp, overlooked skirmishes that grind wars down. A Canadian infantry company held a crossroads near Ortona, Italy, amid shattered olive groves and rubble-strewn lanes. Terrain favored defense. Tight paths hemmed by walls, ditches channeling vehicles into funnels. Briefings flagged German probes, armored cars leading, half-tracks trailing, heavies lurking to exploit gaps. For Canadian lieutenants and corporals, this mirrored the revamped playbook. Big guns anchored rear. PIATs, concealed in overlooks and mounted on carriers, formed the tripwire to maim and mire. In dawn's gray light, engines growled before shapes emerged. Metallic clanks, exhaust fumes wafting. Canadian crews froze in hides, gunners prone with tubes cocked, loaders cradling bombs. Through foliage gaps, the lead SDKFZ. 222 armored car nosed in, lightly skinned but agile antenna whipping. A half-track shadowed, troops aboard scanning. Dim bulks hinted tanks aft, but per plan they waited. Directive was drilled: draw near, bypass heavies, gut the vanguard pacing the thrust. At under 80 yards with the car broadside, the first PIAT whispered death. The spigot struck, bomb soaring low. Impact, a muffled boom, jet piercing flank. Flames licked from vents, the car veering into mud, blocking passage. Seconds later, another position targeted the half-track's belly. Bomb away, crack, wheels mangled, vehicle flipping sidelong. Germans spilled out, seeking cover amid shouts. Rear machines jammed, unable to shove wrecks aside. Heavier armor stalled, exposed to follow on fire. No euphoria on Canadian lines. The teams had executed rote: ambush, select soft spots, launch into kill zones. Yet in the smoke pillars, snarled traffic, and frantic German calls, one truth crystallized. The launcher, derided as awkward, had just derailed a Panzer spear, not by felling a colossus, but by eviscerating its scouts and sinews. What Canadian brass grasped from trials, German staffs would now digest in dispatches. In Wehrmacht after-actions from such halts, tone stayed clinical but irritation seeped. The scout car felled by shape-charge infantry fire at knife range. The half-track crippled in suspension and hull from coordinated close blasts. Isolated, they seemed minor, but mission impact loomed. Route choked, advance frozen, shifting fight to Allied terms with mortars and rifles raining. For reviewing captains and majors, echoes rang familiar. Across theaters, Allied projectors, British, American, lagged heavies but ravaged lights. Canadian PIAT tactics added sting. Sighted for flanks, precision on vitals timed for instant barriers, not fluke resistance, a schooled art. German labs knew the PIAT well. Captures were benchmarked, velocity charts, charge tests. Repurposed under codes, they armed auxiliaries, airfield watches. Technically, a stopgap anti-tank, viable on thin plate but outclassed by main tanks defining blitzes. Yet Canadian-style bushwhacks prompted rethink. Peril wasn't the tube, but enemy dictating clash geometry. A scout shrugging bullets turned fragile to a 100-yard burner. A half-track granting mobility became trap when gutted on choke points. In debriefs, Germans stressed: bolster infantry screens, skirt confined roads, hose suspected hides. Keep lights darting, deny loiter in ambush alleys. Where intel flagged heavy PIAT issuance, reminders. Even crude, arms could throttle flow if foes set the stage. The PIAT hadn't morphed into Uber weapon. Bombs still glanced off Tiger fronts. Crews loathed its heave. Many grunts muttered oaths, but in ledgers of officers tallying charred scouts and stalled sorties, it reframed. Not bungled invention, but nagging peril, especially in Canadian clutches wielding it as retooled and retaught. For those Canadian operators risking all on the method, the foe's pivot stayed unseen. They noted only the halt blazes and their units' dawn survival. The broader arc, the methodical morph of a maligned launcher into a column crusher, would clarify as war surged and successors eclipsed it. By war's heart, the PIAT spawns were undeniable. German behemoths bulked, tigers with impenetrable brows, panthers angled sleek, assault guns hunkered low. Against them, a shaped bomb, even close, might skip or underpenetrate if angled wrong. Canadian commanders saw it early before last tubes departed fronts. They positioned it in webs. 6 and 17-pounders as spine, mines, barrages, typhoons layering. What lingered was need for a true portable piercer, outreaching infantry scraps. Relief arrived via rockets, the American bazooka, then British Enfield designs. Where PIAT brute-forced springs, rockets propelled warheads sans recoil strain, extending arcs. Hits scorched deeper, fuses surer. In trials, they outshone the old projector's quirks. As rocketeers equipped Canadian ranks, PIATs demoted, from assault vanguards to reserves recon. In niches, it clung, blasting bunkers, vehicles in static holds. A bomb shredding a nest or wall afar retained edge, even sans tank primacy. For troops reared on the tube, handover blended utility and emblem. Drills endured. Weak spot hunts, close lures, terrain traps. The Panzer as system view, optics, treads, guts, forged in PIAT days now informed rocket warfare. Gently the launcher's repute crystallized. No pre-war panacea nor African flop. It stood as bridge, stretched taut, then supplanted as fronts advanced. Yet, as rockets claimed anti-tank crowns, the PIAT etched final tailies in Commonwealth annals. In war's twilight, the PIAT diffused to fringes, even as it bowed from tank hunts. Some Canadian and Allied outfits retained it for anti-vehicle snaps. In Northwest Europe, Pacific outposts, bombs turned on supply lorries, gun tows, stone redoubts. A hit crumpling engines or breaching masonry held worth on pinched trails, farm forts, hasty lines. In odd roles, it fit oddly well. Perimeter guards pierced parked planes or raiders. Jungle patrols collapsed barricades beyond rifle reach. Traits once cursing its tank fit now suited hybrid threats sans thick hide. Post-VE day, stockpiles moldered in sheds. Some melted down. Others gifted allies, tinkered in labs. Gunsmiths probed swaps. Longer tubes for range, hybrid charges. These didn't birth standards but affirmed the notion. A shoulder arm bridging rifles and cannons endured allure. For Canadian vets, PIAT echoes mixed. Many recalled heaves and duds, hauls digging spines, early arcs bounding dirt. Others evoked the thudding kill, a half-track aflame, road sealed as vowed. Post-war, survivors graced displays, arsenals, collections. Cleaned of mud, they seemed quaint relics of wartime haste. Plaque readers might glimpse a quirky anti-tank, obsoleted by jets and missiles. The depth from scorn to savvy strikes, and jolts to German plans, demanded memoirs of those halting columns with crude tubes in Canadian grip. In reputriality, chasm lies the PIAT's Canadian essence, and why Wehrmacht brass learned to respect its sting. In warfare's vast chronicle, the PIAT plays a supporting role. It swayed no empires, birthed no doctrines, shaped no arsenals long. Yet its Canadian saga unveils core truths on how forces and folk bend under duress. Conceptually, it sparked as bold fix, explosive lance for foot-slogging tank halts. In Tunisia's grit, that spark dimmed. Armor toughened, fights fluid, a launcher meant to empower instead bred aches and doubts. For early bearers, the PIAT forever linked to strains and shortfalls. Canada might have shelved it, deemed dud awaited superiors. Instead, techs, tutors, troops reframed it as riddle, not lore to cling or chuck. They honed hardware, righted tactics, spoke plain. This won't slay Olafar, but can core a column close on chosen ground versus picked prey. That candor forged awkward into asset. It compelled foe recalibration. German charts might tag PIAT obsolete, but logs screamed else. Choked paths, torched scouts, botched thrusts. Menace stemmed not from acronym, but Canadian discipline deploying it. Ultimately, rockets overtook. The PIAT vanished to vaults and texts, its inheritance. No tech marvel, but subtler wisdom. Flawed gear, wielded by adapters embracing facts, can reshape fields and compel rivals to reassess what they presumed conquered.